The water tower has been around for a long time. And we can see where it's located right here. This is an approximate location of the water tower and was voted at town meeting.
Yep.
It is quite close to McIntyre. They abut it, but we also abut this area here. Some of it's town-owned land, but there's also some public housing here, and it's the old or older Swan Pond Estates is in here. But this tower has been around for a long time on the planning, in the planning stages. Again, I wasn't on the board when they had talked about this, but I've known about this issue for several years. 95, I think, was the first time I heard about it. That tower, we had talked about it in bringing its building sooner if they built the school. And the only reason to do that is because of the elevations, because of the flows of water in these areas. If there's a fire at the school and there's no water tower, there's not enough flow for the fire department to take care of that issue. Also, for some of these bigger houses, even on the old Swan Pond area, Irwin Road, all those areas will benefit from the tower. They also would be a little bit lax on flows, but they're not as high in elevation. So to limit building a water tower at the school, they were going to pull in the eventual building of this larger water tower here on, I guess it is school property, and I believe the school committee has granted that location. So we were going to build this water tower. We were just going to do it sooner so we could save the money on building a water tower at the school or putting expensive pumps in for flows, but they help the pressure. Pumps help pressure. They don't help flow. You need the flow there. And it helps the whole neighborhood in case there's a break somewhere. There's water there from a water tower.
Now, just to clarify, I mean, that was if the school had been built back in '97, basically.
Right. This is now going online because the density of town, the amount of people coming into town, the building in this area alone, has put in 78, I think, or more houses, because there's the original McIntyre Crossing, and then there's the McIntyre Woods, which is in the back a little bit here. That's been done. So it's that. It's not just there. It's Swan Pond. It's Equestrian Road on the other side. There's been a lot of building going on this side of town recently.
Right.
And there's a little bit more that's going to happen.
Mark, I think you.
Yeah, just a point as far as the septic system at the batch. The cost of that, we haven't finished paying for it. It was $150,000, of which we're still going to be paying for that for another 4 years. And that's not included in the $20 million worth of cost to redo the batch. So there's another $150 that, to use a pun, that's going to be flushed out.
All right, thank you. You got a second question?
Yes, my second question is for Representative Jones. Can you talk a little bit about school building assistance reimbursement and how those formulas maybe perhaps have been calculated in the past and how they're going to be calculated going forward?
They've tried to come up with a formula that's a little more understandable. And they start out, everybody starts out with a base percentage. I think it's 38 points, and then they add in some points based on the per capita income as a percentage of statewide, and we take what North Reading's is and divide by the statewide average and come out, and we come up on a ranking. And I think it's fair to say North Reading as a community has become much more affluent over the years. So I think as time goes on, assuming this formula stays, chances are we'd probably be, some of those points that are added on would start to decline a little bit, which is another reason why doing building projects sooner than later is a smart idea. Another one is equalized valuations, how North Reading's relates to the statewide average valuations and where that comes in that. If you look at those where we fall on the chart, we're both in areas that were probably good for another year or two before we slip into the next category, which would add less incentive points. And then they have incentive points for maintenance, and what they decided to do in the interim before they get these completely finalized is use, if you have any projects on the old renovation list for major unfunded repairs, and North Reading happened to have 2 that we were able to find going through the old list, which actually added 4 points to either proposal that were added on shortly before town meeting. There's an energy efficiency component that's an incentive. There's no guidelines for that right now, so there's no points currently. There's renovation reuse, which I think Jonathan touched on, the fact that there's about 1.5 points for the reuse portion of the batch program, none for the new school. There is a project manager, which is envisioned under either scenario, so there's 2 points for that. And then there's innovative community use, and there's no real, the state's still trying to get their hands around what that would mean, but they're open to proposals, and that's something that's not on the table. That's kind of how the incentive points are in the interim right now, and we expect them hopefully to be finalized sometime at the end of this year, which could have some impact on where we're at. But I think, as I touched on before, given the disparity in cost of the 2 projects, it will not, in my opinion, won't overcome the increased cost of doing the batch, given the relocation costs and some other components within the Swan Pond.
Thank you. Amy, you had a question?
John, you have to wake up. Question for you. Could you explain the disparity in the contingencies for construction between the 2 projects? And also talk about the amount that's allocated in the contingency fund for, I believe it was ledge, or at least unanticipated costs with New Swan Pond. And maybe, Chris, if you could comment if you felt like that was enough money that's aside for that.
To refresh, the Swan Pond project, we've assumed a 10% construction contingency for that project. That would be a typical contingency level for a new school, especially based on the fact that we are at the schematic design phase for that facility and that site. We've spent a fair bit of money on that. I think the amount is over $250,000 to date spent looking at that site. And so our architect feels very comfortable that 10% will actually cover any unforeseen adds we need to make to the project to comply with various requests of town bodies, et cetera, that have yet to be incorporated. In addition, at that site, we knew that to actually put the school on the site, we would need to work through some ledge at the site, and we've actually built that into our construction cost as some extraordinary site cost to deal with the ledge there. That differs from the Batchelder project, where we've used a 15% contingency, and we use that for 2 reasons. The first is that is at the conceptual design phase. And so conceptual design, we haven't explored the intricacies of the site in full detail. No one has looked behind walls where there could be a number of issues and things that require remediation. Chris mentioned asbestos that we know we'll have to deal with. It's safe today, but when we actually tear the wall apart, we're going to have to remediate that. And anything near tearing apart an 80-year-old structure. The second element that drove that contingency to 15% was our need to comply eventually with the request of the Historic District Commission. They've been very kind in sort of helping us work through the school issues and have cited modulars there to date to accommodate the needs of the building. There are historical considerations that they will need to take into consideration as they approve any plan to maintain the overall look and feel of the school, the town center. And we wanted to make sure we were fully accounting for what those costs might be, whether they be brick exteriors, slate roofs, etc. And we felt like putting a little bit more in contingency would hopefully allow us to address that. Now, if a whole host of issues come up, we may need to come back to the town for additional funding for that project if there are a number of things we need to add. We hope that 15% will be sufficient.
I think Jonathan has got all those numbers right, or well, as right as you can get at this phase. If I'm not mistaken, it's a single-level school at the Swan Pond site. There is no basement. Two-level. I'm sorry. It's a ground level, is what I meant. No basement. So I guess worst to worst, you change the way you build it and you pin it to the ledge if there's ledge that can support it instead of putting a foundation in. So there are ways, and they have included those costs. Batchelder is kind of another issue because of what's behind the wall. You won't know until you get right into the bones of that building of what's there, what needs to be fixed, what wasn't done right. Though it's standing today, we want it to stand another 50, 60, 70 years or more. So they're gonna have to go in there and look at that, and those things don't get found until the workmen are in there destroying the finishes on the building to get to the bones, to find out that you got a main beam that's literally cracked and ready to fall down, especially when you're gonna move that load-bearing wall and support it a different way. So those contingencies are, it's kind of hard to guess on a renovation of that. New school is pretty fair. One of the questions that one of our board members had on costs was, where was the septic going to go? Are we going to be able to put it in there? Is it going to cost us much more money to put that in there? And the other was, is this a ground level floor? Is there a basement? Because if it's a basement, we have ledge, it's a lot of blasting. Because you got to blast that cellar hole. And I now know that we don't have a basement. It's a ground level floor. So to me, that makes it much more sound on what their calculations were. And we'll know more about this on Tuesday night, because we're going to ask more of these questions. And
Right.
those people that aren't here today will ask those questions. And they will be tough.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Carol Dingman. I'm just curious, if the Swan Pond School didn't pass and another solution was found, what would happen to the Swan Pond property if it's not developed as an elementary school? Would it be likely that would be retained as open space, or would that more than likely be used to cover some expenses, selling it and covering some expenses?
I don't think we've contemplated any sale of the property, that's for sure. We've had that property for a long time as a school site, so I think we probably, in my opinion, would retain it.
There are processes involved, but if the schools were to decide that it was not going to be used as a school site at some point, we wouldn't have the authority to sell it. All we could do is return it to the town, and the decision would be made by others. But I can't imagine giving up the site, even if it weren't approved at this time. We have no other reserve sites for schools. I said at the last FUNC meeting, the people who had the foresight in 1969 to buy the Swan Pond site, we owe them all a debt. And if we use that site now, we've also got a responsibility to start looking to, when another site becomes available, just because you don't know what the future will hold.
Anybody else want to comment on that? No? Okay. Any other questions from the floor?
Could I just comment on that?
Can I stop you? No, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Trish.
As far as the Swan Pond site, as far as preservation of open space, I'd just like to comment that building the new school on the Swan Pond site of 36 acres, the approximate area of that 36 acres that would be used for the building is someplace in the area of 12. And that does not mean 12 acres of clear cut. From day one of planning and designing the Swan Pond School, great care has been taken to retain as many trees, as many natural settings, the old stone walls that are on the site, to preserve as much of that as possible and to cut as few trees. So as far as preservation of open space, whether Swan Pond is built or not, that 36 acres, the best way to preserve it is to put the school on it. You're preserving 24 acres plus of open space that will never be built on. If Swan Pond were not to be built, the land would stay, as Steve Jervy commented, in the care and control of the school committee, and would be preserved as open space. But I absolutely agree with Mr. Jervy that that is the only parcel of land available to future school committees for solutions to any housing problems. So there is a preservation factor in building Swan Pond and preserving open space.
Thank you. All right, well, we're running out of time, so I was going to ask if anyone on the panel had final comments that they wanted to make, brief